Yeah, so
Okay.
it's recording. It looks like that'll work. And
Oh,
either
shoot.
way, I can send you the recording if it comes to me. I'm not sure who will get the link that will take you to the recording.
Okay. So thanks for your patience and let's hop in.
Good.
Okay. So wait, stop cloud recording. Cancel. Recording. Okay. So Jed Diamond, thank you very much for talking with me. Let's start at the very beginning. Where and when were you born?
I was born in New York City, December 21st, 1943.
So that makes you a Capricorn, Sag, kind of on the
Right on
cusp.
the cusp. Sagittarius on the cusp. My wife's an astrologer, so she, yeah, I'm right on the cusp, but Sagittarius.
Do you feel like someone who asks deep questions and is venturous and likes to travel and
Yeah, all of that. I said in my,
I just have to go meet Dries real fast and I'll be right back.
okay. Sorry.
yeah, I was saying in my professional work, I'm moving from being the CEO to being the VHF, the VHS, the visionary healer scholar. So I have a lot of that visionary traveler energy.
I did a book about visionary scientists where I interviewed 65 of them, and the majority, not the majority, but the largest group were Sag.
Interesting.
Yeah, it was interesting. Do you know your other, like your rising and your moon?
Yeah, my rising and moon are in Libra.
So there's really justice and balance and is really important to you.
Indeed.
Uh-huh. Okay, so you said that you felt vulnerable and weak as a boy, and that a lot of boys do. Could you explain that to those of us who haven't been boys?
Well, it's interesting. It was both weak and also strong in that my father, when I was 5 years old, had, quote, a nervous breakdown. He became depressed. He couldn't make a living to support his family and went into a mental hospital after taking an overdose of pills. And so I lost my father, and then my mother had to go out to work. So I really was kind of on my own. So I felt both vulnerable, and all of a sudden my tight knit family came apart. But also I was on my own, and I had to develop, a lot of very early skills for taking care of myself and taking care of others, starting with going to visit my father in the mental hospital with my uncle from the time I was 5, because my mother couldn't seem to handle that. So I became very independent and very, somewhat worldly. It fit my personality, but also had a deep kind of hole in the soul. I talk about where my father's energy would have been, and losing my father, I lost my mother as well.
Do you have siblings?
No siblings, just me.
Wow, that was a heavy load.
Yeah. Yeah.
The in the men that I'm talking with, there's a real emphasis that a lot or the core of men's issues are the lack of a involved father model, and that's really pivotal. And it's of course even more difficult with divorce and not having the dad in the same house. So is that your conclusion as well?
Yeah, I've certainly true in my life. And, after working with men and their families for 52 years now, I see it as a really common pattern, both for men and women, with fathers who were either absent physically or emotionally or through death, divorce, or just because they didn't learn from their own fathers. Often this is multi-generational, and these patterns then influence our health, our relationships with our love mates, and then how we present ourselves in the world.
What I'm not clear on is what's the difference between learning from a mother and learning from a father? I know that you concluded there's really basic biological differences, that your cells are all XY, my cells are all XX, and that really does influence it. I'm trying to get a handle on what mothers can't teach boys.
Well, from, having been raised by a mother, there's a lot that, having what mothers can teach, but what they can't teach is what it means to be a man. They can't teach, Robert Bly, who is a colleague and a friend over the years, said that, and this is more poetic, but I think it represents a biological reality as well. He said that males, he was talking particularly about young males, but males at any age, need to be in the company of other men in order to hear the sound that male cells sing. That was Robert Bly. It's his poetic. But I think there's a true biological reality that every cell in our body, as you point out, is biologically different. We 10 trillion cells in the human body, and the scientists say that every one of them is sex specific, meaning that if you're a woman, you have an XX pair of chromosomes in each cell. If I'm a male, I have an XY. And those biological differences make a difference in all kinds of things, how our bodies function, how the cells function. And on an energetic level, we might say, which is what Robert Bly was talking about, that our cells have a vibration, and there's a male vibration that's different from a female vibration. And I think we all intuitively know that. And so when we lose a male figure in the family, we don't grow up with a father, we lose that male vibration. And I think that influences women. They need a male vibration as well, and then get overly, as I did, overly involved with a feminine energy, although I lost both, as many people do when they lose one family member, the other family member, whether you have them present or not, there's something that's lost as well.
The articles that I'm reading are that brain differences are really minimal. You can't really say there's a female brain or a male brain, but you quote authors who say, yes, the female brain tends to be more empathetic, and the male brain tends to be more interested in systems and structures. So tell us about that.
Well, again, it's not just my research. There's been a lot of research that goes throughout the world. And a lot of it's depending on what your point of view is and what your emphasis is. And I think there's been a lot of confusion over the years, and understandably so, that particularly women have said, I don't want to emphasize the differences because differences have traditionally been used against often women. If we're different, then we're told we can't do this and we can't do that because women are too soft, they're too gentle, they can't be, they can't be tough, they can't be brain surgeons, they can't be business successes. And, obviously that's not true. But in trying to create a level playing field, I think in some ways we've denied the both biological, psychological, social, spiritual differences between men and women. So my work over the years has been, rather than trying to deny, which I think is a pretty now strongly accepted reality, that there are significant differences. Not just men saying this, but many women. I've worked for years with Marianne J. Legato, who is a woman, a doctor, surgeon, and cardiac specialist. And she started the Partnership for Gender-Specific Medicine. And for the last 30 or more years has done research at her institute and drawn on research from all over the world that really indicates that the sexes are very different. But what my work has been, and many others, Rianne Eisler, who I've worked with over the years at the Center for Partnership Studies, recognizes that the problem isn't that we need to take away the gender differences. What we need to do is take away the domination society, the domination culture that we've been living in for many, many thousands of years, really, that says differences are hierarchical. Differences mean that one is better than the other, one is on top of the other. In our ancient partnership roots, which is more than 99% of human history, differences were not seen as better than or worse than. And I think that's the reality that more of us want to get back to, so that we can celebrate the differences, but still be able to be living in partnership. Because clearly, a domination way of looking at the world and being in the world, what we've been doing to the earth by way of trying to dominate, what we've done to ourselves by way of trying to dominate and control our inner world, trying to dominate other men if we're top, dominating men that are lower, dominating women and children. That's created a lot of the violence we see in the world at all levels, and created really an unsustainable world that if we keep doing that, humans aren't going to be around for much longer. And I think I do, I have children and grandchildren. I want them to have long lives, and I want humanity to get back to a more balanced and more connected way of living in the world.
Um, I'm thinking in the radical feminist movement of the 60s and 70s, there was an emphasis on gender roles are socially constructed. They're not biologically based. And I'm hearing that from teenagers. I did a book on climate girls changing our world, and a couple of them just wrote me that we decided we're non-binary because biology has nothing to do with gender. And so it's interesting that that kind of theme or dialogue or discussion is still alive.
Mhm. Well, I think they're not, from a scientific point of view, they're not incompatible. I mean, there's variations in humanity, there are variations in individuals, there's variations between men and women. The fact that in a dominator society, uh, binary is part of the deal. In egalitarian societies, whether they're Native American or indigenous cultures all over the world, they recognize, yes, that males and females are different in many ways. There are differences between a male type brain and a female type brain, but they also recognize that not all men have male type brains predominantly. And there are variations in sexuality, there are variations in how we relate, there are variations in sexuality. In an egalitarian partnership society, those are well recognized.
It's like the concept of bradage, that
Exactly.
it's not just male, female, there's other options.
Exactly.
So I mean, this may be simplistic, but if you were going to list the songs that the XY chromosome cells are singing, how is it different than the XX song?
Well, it's kind of like music. Um, how do you describe the difference between Bach and Beethoven, or between the Rolling Stones and the Beatles? Everybody would say, well, it's a different sound. I know the difference, but would you quantify it? That's so. When you look at brain science or you look at biological science, there are things you can quantify. There are very specific things that XX chromosomes do differently that they're finding out. And this is new science, so this is not surprising that it's not in the mainstream of culture yet.
Like what? What are
Well,
those?
for instance, that they found that the way proteins are created and the way that the biological systems operate are different if they're in a female XX environment. The fact that males generally don't live as long as females. Um, there's new, again, biological evidence that having a double X chromosome that all females have in their bodies actually creates proteins and then hormones that are more protective of life, that they live longer, that men are more vulnerable. We know that at every age, from babies on up, males die sooner. Well, some of that's social, some of that's the way we relate in our environment, but some of it turns out to be biological, and increasingly they're finding out that the biology is different. Here's another one that's very, I mean, many people have been taking a sleeping pill to go to sleep at night called Ambien. It's a very common sleeping medication. And it's been assumed that when you go to the doctor and you get a prescription for Ambien or any other medication, rarely do they say there's a different dose for males than for females. They just assume, other than biological sexual differences, men and women's bodies are the same. Well, it turns out they're not. And with Ambien, they actually studied and found that the way females metabolize Ambien is different than the way male bodies, even you know getting the same weight and body size uh, controlled for. That it turns out women wake up after sleeping pill, taking the same pill, the same dose, same body weight, and are still under the influence of a sleep medication in the morning while they're driving their kids to school or whatever they're doing in the morning. And males metabolize the medication more quickly, so they don't get the benefit. So uh, that's probably true of just about any medication you can think of, but they've never tested for it. When they do, they find there's actual biological differences in the way the brain metabolizes drugs and a whole lot of other things. So I could go in, there's a lot of research. We could talk forever, but we got other
Yeah.
things to talk about. But it's a lot of really good information that shows there are biological differences that are important and need to be paid attention to.
Do you think that's an evidence of kind of a dominator culture that scientists have said, well, we don't want to experiment with drugs on women because they have hormonal cycles and they're too hard to carry, figure out all the variables. So we'll just
That was
test
part
it.
of it. Part of it was not so much dominator, but just trying to be protective of women, which has its own kind of, domination, protection. And just that women's biology, it was more complicated. It was simpler to study the biological changes in men because their hormonal, ups and downs were not as prevalent. Although my book, Male Menopause, helps show that males, in addition to females, have biological rhythms, and there is, in fact, something called male menopause that has a similar kind of cycle to what women go through.
Well, since we're talking about that, what do you advise men? Should they take testosterone supplements? Like women are advised to take estrogen, progesterone at menopause sometimes. What do men do about it?
Well, the first thing is to recognize that, like women, men have biological rhythms and changes, and that at midlife, testosterone drops in men just like estrogens drop in women, as do testosterone. Women have testosterone and men have estrogens. So the first is just recognizing that there are hormonal changes. The second is then being able to measure them to see what your testosterone, estrogen, other hormone levels are. And then the third is to see if they're outside the normal range and you're having symptoms, what do you do about them? And there's a lot of, I've written books and treatment programs. There's a whole range of things that range from hormonal balance that you can do with men as you can with women, to changes in diet, changes in exercise, changes of hormonal, other kind of balancing ways other than taking supplemental hormones. So there's a lot that can be done, but again, the recognition that humans are males and females, and that differences can make a difference, and there's many similarities that we didn't know before, like men have hot flashes. Significant number of men, when I did research, turn out to have hot flashes. Well, women's hormones tend to drop more rapidly. So it would make sense often that the hormones that regulate the cycles in the brain that have to do with heat and warmth and cold, can get shifted. Well, men also have hormonal changes, but they're not as rapid. So often the numbers of men, percentages of men who have hot flashes are less than women, but they have them, not surprising.
Hmm. You mentioned that there's an American male diet that would somehow contribute to maybe a rough transition. What is that diet? I mean, I think of Donald Trump and hamburgers and
Yeah.
Diet Coke.
Well, that's a little my little summary, the male American diet, MAD, MAD. Uh, and it's obviously, there's a lot of overweight men and women, and none of us, do really well in this country and many other countries. We're an obese world as well as a world that's starving. Um, and a lot of it has to do with eating, too much animal products and too much fat and too much beef that's injected with hormones. And there's a lot of reasons. Men tend to, be associated with that, the male meat eater culture. That's not biological. That's, what the culture has told men is manly. I grew up that way. I grew up with a mother that thought, since I didn't have a father in the home, I needed to get some manly. Uh, and back in the 50s, when I was growing up, that was when you got a side of beef delivered, cut up into steaks of all kinds, delivered to your freezer. And so I had meat 3 times a day because it was quick, and my mother had to work. So for breakfast, I'd have a hamburger. For lunch, I'd have you know, a chop, a pork chop, and for dinner, I'd have steak. Because that was when meat was cheaper, and when you worked, you just wanted to get it fast. So I thought that's how men were supposed to eat. So did she. Turned out I got fat until I learned that meat was not so healthy, and I found out that eating vegetarian was healthier and actually felt better for me.
And it's better for the planet.
It's better for the planet.
It's amazing how much methane cows release.
Yeah, yeah. Not to mention all the what you do to the land in order to produce the grain that cows eat.
Cut down the rainforests, our
Yeah.
lungs, our
Right.
planetary lungs. Could you say a word about your education and career path? What led you to be a therapist?
Well, like all people that have done this, for me, it started with my family. My father going into the mental hospital. I grew up wondering whether that would happen to me. Would I go crazy or break down or not be able to support my family? And so I thought I would go off to medical school, become a psychiatrist, and you know, somewhere help people like my father and like others. And it's what I did. I went through UC Santa Barbara, got my bachelor's degree, and then went to medical school at UC San Francisco. But at the time, I felt medicine was restrictive at the time and very much an all boys club, mostly an all white boys club. And there were only a few women. I don't think there were any people of color in my class. And given my background, parents that were very radical of the times, and didn't work for me. Plus, I just felt like there was more to healing than the very restrictive biological model. So I dropped out of medical school. I had to see a psychiatrist to leave because the view was that you must be crazy to give up a 4-year full tuition fellowship, which I
Yeah.
had at the time, and I left and went into social work because that seemed to be a broader field and something that I was drawn to. So I ended up getting a master's degree in social work. And then what was interesting about social work of the time was that unlike medicine and psychology, it was much more broadly based. There were like 4 different divisions within a social work education. There was called casework, where you did kind of individual counseling and therapy. There was group work, where you worked with groups. There was family therapy, and then there was community organizing, where you're working with community systems. And that was a very much broader, I think, much more for me, education that fit for me, which I did, and then went into numerous fields, treatment programs for addicts, private counseling, organizing communities. And eventually I went back to school. This is just 10 years ago, got a Ph.D. in international health because I really wanted to do some more in-depth study on the different ways in which men and women experience depression. So not surprising given my roots. And so I studied and there was a new program that was being developed on where I got a PhD in international health and looked at, as it turned out, pandemics and infectious disease and the changes in health patterns from the past to the future. And when COVID hit, I was given lectures all over the world on some of the things about infectious disease that most people didn't know, and a few experts did, and still were hopefully learning more about that. And then the work that I've been doing in recent years is taking all that I've learned and really combining all these different levels of science and the individual, the small groups, the family issues, and then the societal issues, and putting them together in programs that can hopefully help men, women, children, and the world in which we're all a part.
So if someone wanted to participate in that program, Men Alive, what would they, what would they do?
Well, it's multiple programs. People, if they come to the website menalive.com, that's my main website. There's articles that you can read that are on 10 different areas of health. There are books. I've written 16 books so far. There are programs that work in a number of areas that I've written a whole program for the 5 stages of love and how people can have better relationships that I think is the core of many people's lives. I have programs that help with hormonal changes and the changes we go through as we get older. I have programs that really help people who are leaders in the world. I've been training people who want to recognize that we're out of balance with the world, that we need leaders, clinicians, and broadly based clinicians that can help people with what we're facing in the 21st century so that we can deal with the violence that's going on in the world towards other people, towards men, towards women and children, and really create a world that I think we all want for our children and grandchildren and great grandchildren. So there's a lot that I'm excited about, and a lot that I think we can offer the world. And I think it's time for men and women to come together in ways that we haven't before. It's time for uh, different groups to come together rather than so much us against them that we seem to be caught up in our society, and a time to reconnect with our ultimate home, which is our planet here, Gaia, our mother, Father Earth.
Right. You outlined the 5 stages of a relationship, and the hardest one is stage 3, where people, all their illusions fall apart, they're disillusioned. What did you learn from your 3 marriages that helped you identify those stages?
Well, I could say my first 2 marriages were kind of like a lot of people. I thought there was 2 stages. You look for that perfect partner. You fell in love. That was stage 1. And then stage 2, you built the life together. And then you lived happily ever after, I thought. Uh, but didn't work out that way with my first marriage. I had children, and after 10 years, it didn't work out. We fell apart. And then you kind of go through that what happened and figuring out, and then you try it again. And maybe I made the mistake. I picked the wrong person. So I picked somebody else who I thought was right. And I went through it again and went through another divorce again. So before before trying again, which is not only bad in your life, if you break up with a family, you break up with a partner, but if you're a family therapist like I was, and you're teaching other people how to have good relationships, it's more than embarrassing when your relationship falls apart. So I thought before I do it again, I better learn some things. So I did some therapy, I did some healing myself, I did some more in-depth understanding, and then I developed these ideas that I've come to call the 5 stages of love, and fell in love again for the third time. But this time, I had a better sense of it, worked together, and my wife, present wife, Carlin, and I have been now married for 41 years. And now we know that what I call disillusionment, which used to be where people fall apart. Oh, you're not who I thought you were. I thought we were this, and now we're that, and maybe I picked the wrong person, and you go through that again. That in fact, disillusionment is a stage of a good marriage. It's a way in which the illusions that we project on our partner come down. The fact of our childhood wounding that so many of us grew up in, that really creates a faulty love map, because in some way we're recreating a lot of the problems we had in our families that we never resolved. And in stage 3, we get to heal those. We have an opportunity to heal those. And as we heal the old wounds and we get a better sense of how to relate to a real partner, then we get to what I call stage 4, real lasting love. So it's real in that we've gotten past many of the illusions. It's real because we've healed a lot of the wounds from the past. And it's lasting because we're no longer projecting our unmet needs on the other person, but we're have a partnership based on equality and based on true partnership. And then we're able to get to stage 5, which again I didn't know existed when I started, which is finding our calling as a couple. We think of, as we go through life, going from career to calling, where in midlife and beyond we find what our unique offering is in the world. And I think couples have their own kind of unique calling if we are able to get through this whole journey together and find that there's something. Doesn't mean we work at the same career, but it means that we really are there to bring our own unique passions in the world to something that we create together. Sometimes, as in our case, we have children together, 5 children and 17 grandchildren. But beyond that, my wife and I have a, a shared vision of what we can do in the world, what we can bring to the world. What would it be like if we had a world where couples really were living in full harmony, where families really were healthy? What might that create in terms of better governments, better systems, better education systems, better policing in the world, better ways in which the genders can relate, better ways in which Black and Anglo and different ethnic groups can meet, and various sexual orientation. Just think what it would be like if we had that kind of more healthy relationship. So that's the potential. That's one of the things we teach at Men Alive.
And how is your wife involved in that outreach?
Well, in a number of ways over the years. It started out. She says that one of the reasons she thinks we have such a good 41-year marriage is that I've been in a men's group that's been meeting for 42 years. And it's one of the things that I discovered. As you know, I've written a number of books. My most recent book is called 12 Rules for Good Men, that really was inspired by my wife. She said, with all the conflict that's going on in the world, and all the conflict between males and females, and the Me Too movement, and the hopefully getting past the abusive sexual ways in which many men have been in the world with women, that she saw a lot of the healing that needed to happen was males healing and getting past the armoring that a dominator society kind of foists on men and women in other ways. And so she challenged me to write this book that would be a more prescriptive book than I've written in the past that would really tell men and women, here's the things that we've learned over the years that really can help create good men in today's world. And what does that mean to be a good man? And in the book, I try to at least give my perspective. And the first rule is join a men's group. That was the one that I felt was so key. My wife's been in a women's group for years. And it's really part of, I think, what men need to do for our own healing, in the way that I mentioned that Robert Bly talks about hearing the sound that male cells sing. Well, I can tell you is there's a very different sound that male cells and female cells in their own way learn and resonate with when men are in a men's group together and women are in a women's group together. And then my wife and I are in mixed group. We have groups, have a village circle that we've been meeting with for about 17 years, where men and women come together to do our own joint healing. So all of that is part of what our journey is together and what we hopefully bring to the world through our various books and our various offerings.
What are a couple more specific ways to raise good men besides make sure they have contact with supportive men?
Well, another core aspect is healing our anger and ambivalence towards women. Uh, I think all of us who grew up in families have this very distorted view of women in our lives. Some of that's because of not having supportive fathers. Some of it's because women themselves grew up in families that were disordered. My mother grew up in a family where she lost her father when she was young. And so she grew up in the kind of uh, wounded nurturing. Uh, my mother was fearful from the time I was born that I would die, uh, and that she would die. Uh, and I read that the philosopher uh, who who uh, looked at the way in which men and women were wounded, talked about growing up in a family where he says this is Thomas Hobbes who wrote about the inherent people being growing up being nasty,
Brooding.
brutish, and short was our lifespan. Well, it turned out that Thomas Hobbes' mother, uh, when she gave birth to him, it was right at the time when the Spanish Armada was invading England, and she obviously very fearful for her. And Hobbes later said that his mother gave birth to twins, himself and Fear. And that really resonated for how I was brought into the world. My mother was terribly afraid that I would die and she would die. So when you're raised by a very, very fearful mother, then you grow up with pain and hurt, anger, and other things. So healing our relationship with women is another part of it. Being able to deal with uh, the the feeling cut off from the larger society is another part of the healing our relationship to the planet, dealing with death and dying in ways that we've tended to deny. So there's a whole host of practices that we try to share with men and women. I say it's a book for men, uh, but it really is a book for men and women because, let's face it, you really can't talk about males without talking about females. Can't talk about men without talking about women. I mean, we are inherently connected, and we get half our genes from our mother, we get half from our father. Wherever our relationships end up, we still have to work through our relationships in all the different aspects.
It seems pivotal what you said that we learn to be angry at our mothers. Is that because they're the dominant parent, so they can't satisfy all our needs? Is it because they're safe and we can dump our anger on them? what's the dynamic of having
Well,
anger
there's 100 reasons from, being abused, and feeling angry because of that, for all the reasons you say. I think the basic thing is that when you think about some of the differences between males and females, one is all of us come out of the body of a female. That's kind of the nature of being human and being a mammal and being, coming out of a female body. Males, if we're going to be males, we at some level recognize that I'm different than the body of the person I came out of. I'm not a female. And there's both a longing to be connected. You know, there's the joke we spend all our life, trying to separate, get out of the separation of our woman, separate from the woman's energy. And then we spend a lifetime trying to get back, trying to have sex with women or get back into the womb, and then are afraid of that. So I think part of males' anger towards women is our ambivalence, that we both long to bond with them, to be held by, nurtured, and the fear of losing ourselves in the power of a woman's body, of a woman's energy. And so the healing that needs to happen has to happen on these multiple levels: psychological, social, spiritual, and relational.
Yeah, I did a book on 50-50 parenting, and what seemed crucial is that men had to be involved, so that becoming a boy doesn't mean you just do the opposite of what women do.
Right.
So if it's just like, okay, I can't be, because that's, I think, what boys hear. Don't be feminine, don't be a
Right.
sissy, don't be a girl. Oh, that looks like a girl's thing.
Right.
So it's a don't.
Right.
And that's very difficult.
Right, exactly. So there's lots to talk about. I'm afraid I'm going to have to wind up for today. As I said, I have another appointment coming in at the top of the hour that I have to get ready for. So we've got just a few more minutes. We can, whatever we need to do to wrap up today.
Well, let's stop there, because I'd like to keep going, because there's a lot of material here.
Yeah, we can schedule
Wait,
another time and have a little more time to